Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me this Sunday. And today I'm going to be talking about a really important and interesting topic called the spiritualization of humanity, or the etherization of the blood. All right, so pretty deep topic today. And just so you know, there is a little PDF that's going to go with this talk today. That's just going to give you some diagrams and images and little summaries about what we're talking about today. And Wolf is going to have that for you in the chat. You just click the link and you just download it, and then you can open that right up. And then while you're watching me and listening, you can follow along in your PDF. If you're watching this on the replay on YouTube, there will be no link in the description for you. I'm going to edit the images in when I post this video. So all of the images that will be in the PDF will already be on the screen for you. All right. I'm going to be lecturing today for maybe around 2 hours or so. I think that's where kind of my goal is. We have a lot of information to cover today, though, so I'm optimistic. And at the end of that period, I'm going to dive in and take your questions. So the only thing that I ask is that you keep your questions on the topic and to not stray into other topics. Here on the platform, I do live Q&As, obviously, every 2 weeks, and that's your time to ask any questions that you want about any topic that you want. All right. So this lecture, we're going to focus on a couple different approaches to the topic. So we're going to focus on what is ascension. What is ascension and what is spiritualization? What is the spiritualization of the form, and why should we focus on it? How does the human being spiritualize themselves? How does the process occur? Exactly. Not, I think, not maybe, exactly. How exactly does it occur? And if we can spiritualize ourselves and we can evolve essentially out of this plane, which is what spiritualization or ascension is, then is there also the opportunity to devolve or to fall backwards, or can we regress? And in that conversation, I'm going to get into a little bit of Lucifer and Ahriman and eighth sphere conversation. Okay. I want to stress as well that this is a huge topic that's going to probably take lots of lectures and time and study to really understand. So we're just scratching the surface of it here today and covering one of the most important aspects of it, which is the heart center and the etherization of the blood. So I'm going to keep bringing it back to that this first time that we're talking about this. The other thing that I want to make clear as well is that I'm going to be using the Anthroposophical system in order to explain this, or spiritual science. And I've also tied in, where I could, some Eastern information as well, just to try to make this a well-rounded talk. And at the end, I'm going to be giving my some kind of personal readings and analysis on this, okay? All right, so I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but when you tune into modern spirituality, one of the things that you always hear is that people are ascending. I've got these ascension symptoms. I'm ascending into the 5D. I'm ascending into the 4D. I'm spiritualizing. And there's all of this talk about the fact that humanity and the planet is apparently ascending. And it's actually been a huge topic for about 15 or 20 years. But it's funny because it doesn't really seem, even though we're talking about it, it still seems like there's so much that we need to understand about it. And we need to get very exact about it and bring that spiritual scientific perspective into it so that we can know exactly what's going on and actually participate in this process consciously, right? So ascension, what does that mean? What does spiritualization mean? Well, it means that we are leaving the material realm behind, or it means that we're going to transform ourselves out of the mineral level of existence. It's associated with transmutation and transformation and the healing of the self. as though we kind of heal ourselves or transform ourselves into this higher form. Going a little bit deeper into that concept, when a human being does begin to transform themselves, does begin to heal themselves, they actually begin to take on more actually precisely an etheric form. Okay, and this is going to be something that we'll be diving into more and more in this lecture, is the etheric body, the etheric form, and the transformation of our bioenergetic field eventually, so that we loosen ourselves out of the physical world entirely into a transformed, integrated etheric form. Okay, so that's really what ascension is. And if we could remember one thing, it would probably be that. It would probably be that the spiritualization process is really the process of creating this very integrated and powerful etheric body that loosens itself from the physical body. And that is really our spiritualization. Okay. So sometimes when you hear that we are spiritualizing ourselves out of matter, or that we're ascending, you think, well, if we're ascending, why do we need to ascend? Why can't we just stay in this realm forever? What is the pattern here? What is the pattern that's going on? Well, we actually descended into the physical mineral material realm that we're in now. And we actually formed this body and this earth over a very long period of time. And humanity and the earth had prior conditions of life. You know, there was a more astral earth. There was a more etheric earth. And now we're on the physical expression of the earth. But there's a chain of existence and conditions of life that we have been on, and conditions of consciousness that we have been evolving and been on. And so we really fell, or we descended into the material plane. And of course, this is where we get all of the imagery about the fall from the Bible and from various different ancestral myths, is this descension into the mineral realm, into the material realm. The element that it represents is the mineral realm, the physical realm, the material plane. Okay, so we fell into this plane, and then we rise out of it. So it's kind of like we're going like this, really. We fell into the material plane and we're rising out of it. And that rising is that spiritualization process. And now you may be asking yourself, well, why? Why did we fall into matter? Why did we go through this intense process of individuation? And the reason for it is because we had to develop our individuality. And now in Anthroposophy, this is called the I, not EYE, the capital I. And the capital I is our ability to think independently, our ability to do rational analysis, calculations, to truly understand things and express ourselves creatively via our own volition. Before this time period, we did not have the ability to do that, and I cannot stress this enough. The conditions of consciousness in lost civilizations like Atlantis and Lemuria were completely different than where we find ourselves today. And we'll be going even deeper into this in this today as well, because we're also going to find that there are very important figures or masters that help us make this transition of worlds. And that's something that we have to study and know about as well. So we descended into the material plane and we rise out of it. And really, we're sort of retracing our footsteps. We're sort of retracing our footsteps back into the higher realms, but with an I developed, or with an individuality developed, you could say. Okay, so ultimately, man was an etheric form in the past and densified into our present material condition. And we will now retrace that pattern and have the opportunity to rise back into a higher form with our individuality intact. This is called the ascension or spiritualization of man. it can be more clearly understood as the loosening of the etheric body from the physical, okay? So how does the human being spiritualize themselves? How exactly does that process work? We know what's going on. We know the planet is rising. We know humanity is rising. So how exactly do we do that? To be precise, and we do have to be very, very precise here, because currently in the world, there's a lot of very bizarre and strange and distracting information around this that's incorrect. And so we do have to be very precise about this in order to align ourselves with the actual evolutionary path of humanity, of ourselves. So the way that we spiritualize ourselves and rise out of the material plane, or begin to evolve into the next level of humanity, is through transmutation. Okay, it's through transformation. Inner transformation, inner transmutation. It's through inner alchemy. There is no other way. The only way that we move beyond the physical plane and evolve with the solar system and evolve with the earth is through inner transmutation, through inner alchemy. Okay, and so how that occurs is through how exactly we circulate the energy in our body, how exactly we are making these connections between our subtle bodies and our physical body, how we're unifying our mind and heart, and basically how we circulate our energy in our body is sort of the more physical or physical spiritual component of our transformation. So the way that we kind of circulate our energy in our body and how it moves through our energy centers, it can also draw certain forces closer to us and into us. And sometimes these forces are healthy and they're good and they lead to our evolution and inspiration and regeneration. And sometimes how we are moving our energy within our field, how we're circulating it, according to where our mind is, can also begin to draw in sometimes not so good forces and darker energies and darker presences. And so there is this sense that as we evolve, we are kind of evolving with a larger system by what we're attracting or what we're repelling. And that we are very much in control at this point in time with our eye developed as to how we do evolve, as to exactly how we grow. In prior eras of the earth, we were more subject to these things. Okay, so this is key. When we're talking about the kind of essence that we're circulating in our system, it's the Christ essence. So it's Christ consciousness. We want to align our being, align our essence with Christ consciousness, which allows certain alchemical transformations to occur in our system. And that actually over time evolves our form. So it is the presence of Christ, and specifically Christ in the etheric, which we will get into a little bit further, within our system that catalyzes us into our evolution. So Christ is the evolutionary catalyzing energy for us, presence for us within ourselves. And so this doesn't happen overnight. We don't transform ourselves overnight. It actually takes a long period of time, and that's really good because we have to do it very thoroughly, and we get lots of lives and opportunities in order to work upon ourselves. So it's not like it's going to happen overnight. Sometimes there's different, I think, narratives in spirituality where it's like there's going to be this giant solar flash, or there's going to be this giant event, and that's going to be the ascension event. And in reality, it's a slower transmutation that happens over a period of time. Okay, that's really how we need to look at it. Okay. And this is very different than some of the other narratives that we will hear. If you're following my work, you know about Mars mysteries, you know about my lectures on organic evolution and devolution. And there are various different teachings and perspectives on creation that go directly against our evolutionary path and that draw us away from Christ consciousness and that draw us away from our path. And these are narratives that tell us that we actually evolve through external modifications, things like hybridization or genetic manipulation. This is more like an antichrist path because the Christ consciousness is within us and we need to activate it and learn about it and use it upon ourselves in order to evolve through inner transmutation. But the narratives that we evolve through external modification, like transhumanism, like genetic modification, these are exact inversions of the process that we're talking about today. This is trying to work upon the body physically, externally, in order to evolve, which isn't actually possible and leads to a very big dead end in your spiritual process. Okay. So sometimes when we hear that we have to connect with Christ consciousness within ourselves, or it's sort of vague and it's like, okay, that makes sense, but how do I do that? And why is that the case? And what about Jesus? What about Jesus Christ? And where does his life and his actions play into this whole thing, right? And this is where we're going to start getting into the meat and the bones of what is called esoteric Christianity or mystical Christianity or Anthroposophy. And this is very different than dogmatic Christianity. This is a very different line of thought, really, from a lot of the dogmatic Christianity that we see today. So let's understand how a man, an individual, a man, can offer a new evolutionary impulse to the planet. How can a man offer an evolutionary impulse to the entire planet and to humanity? So we can't actually understand this unless we understand it on an esoteric level, right? It's just not good enough unless we understand it esoterically. We have to understand what's happening on a higher dimensional level. You know, what is happening to the etheric body of the earth and the spiritual body of the earth, and why does that connect into man? We have to get into this in order to really understand what's going on. So the evolutionary cosmic impulse for the planet and for humanity actually needs to be embodied by an individual, by a human being of the earth, in order for evolution, an evolutionary path to be possible. So I'll say that again. The evolutionary cosmic impulse of the time, so the initiation of the earth or the evolutionary path, the impulse of the new evolutionary path for mankind, that actually has to be embodied and taken on by an individual of the earth. It has to be personified. That needs to happen. Otherwise, it just basically stays an external impulse, like a solar ray or a cosmic impulse. There actually needs to be a very advanced individual that takes on that impulse and personifies it and allows it to set within their being. And then there are certain rituals or processes that can go on that are aligned with certain celestial events and things like this. A giant ritual, basically, a very holy one, where the transformations that the master does or that this individual does then go into the earth, and then they end up being available for all mankind. So they go into the etheric or spiritual body of the earth, and then they are then available for all mankind. Okay? So a spiritually advanced human being must first take on the evolutionary impulse, personify it on behalf of the earth and humanity. Very, very important. Now, this had not ever been done to the degree that it was done until our Greco-Roman era with the incarnation of Jesus. So in the Eastern traditions, there are certain masters and certain very powerful individuals, but this is different because Christ's life in itself was a ritual. It is the action that he did that changed the world more than anything. Whereas with other teachers, it's more about the wisdom they shared, but with Christ and in Christ's life, it's really the fact that he took on something and gave it to humanity, which is very different than sort of the masters of the past. So the masters of the past were leading up to this one very pivotal point where we reached this deep, intense state of matter on the earth. And we needed that evolutionary impulse to bring us out, which is why Jesus is also associated with redemption and spiritualization and ascension. And that's part of what we understand about his life and about him, is that he represents that dematerialization. Right? That's because of what he did in his life and what he offered humanity. Okay? So in this way, this very advanced individual can act as a mediator or a translator between worlds, between the physical world and between the spiritual world. And so in a sense, Christ was actually taking on, in a way, the etheric body of the earth himself. And he was a mediator. Now, this is actually always what priests or priestesses have always been, is they've always just been the mediator between. So that this is just taking that to its peak level for our evolutionary cycle. And so you may be asking yourself, now, how can an individual, even if they're very advanced, which we would call that a master, we'd call that a spiritual master, and there are spiritual masters. How could a spiritual master, how could Jesus, how could he actually affect the earth? How could his energy, how could that affect the earth? How could that affect humanity? Right? This was always my question when I'd hear about Christ's life from a dogmatic side of things. I'd be like, yeah, but how? The energetic details, please. And how this happens is actually because he takes on the spirit of the sun. The spirit of the sun. How Christ is able to actually influence the planet and change the condition of the planet and change the etheric form of the planet is because he literally takes on within him the spirit of the sun, the solar essence, what's called the great spirit of the sun. He does this for 3 years. And then he goes through the ritual that is his death, which solidifies the entire thing. That is the real powerful white kind of magic of ritual. And so it is because he takes on the sun, the spirit of the sun, that he's able to have this kind of power. You know, the average person just can't start affecting the spirit of the earth. And by the way, if you can affect the spirit of the earth, right, you can affect all humanity. You give something to the entire human race, every human being. You make something available for them. Because we are also all plugged into the spirit of the earth and using the spirit of the earth as a kind of etheric, as a kind of nourishing thing that we reference. We're always referencing the spirit of the earth. We're connected to it. We are of it. We are part of it. Now we're individuals. We have an eye. We can choose what we take from it, but it is available to us, whatever's in the earth, whatever's of the earth, right? So the reason why Christ was able to do this is because he takes on the spirit of the sun for 3 years up until his death, from the age of 30 to the age of 33. And why this is also able to take place is because everything in existence was first within the sun. And actually our planet and every human being is within the magnetic field of the sun. And the magnetic field is sort of just the physical thing, the kind of more physical thing that we can sense. But it's more than just the magnetic field of the sun that we are in. We're also in the information field of the sun. And we are also part of the sun, just as we are part of the earth. And so when an individual can take on the essence of the sun, the spirit of the sun within his being, he can then affect the entire earth, and he can affect humanity. And now Jesus had trained for many different lives to do this. And this is something that is an initiation when you sort of get into the level of mastership. Just like there's different human initiations at our level, we take on certain energies as well. Like when we go and we want to be initiated, we want to develop psychically, we want to become more mystical as a person or more evolved. We're just taking on greater and greater cosmic energies within our being. We're just catalyzing ourselves with greater and greater cosmic energies, right? Well, what Christ did was just took on the greatest. And we know also that people with charisma, people with the power of influence, can learn how to do that by taking on certain energies. They can influence people. They can, there's certain things you can do. So this actually, it's not such a crazy thing to do. We know we can influence each other. We know we can take on higher cosmic rays within our being that evolve us. We know that. What we're seeing with Christ is we're seeing this to the highest, most elite and refined degree possible. Okay, so that's how that happens. And I have a couple little pictures in your book if you want to check that out, beginning with page 3. Okay, so on page 3, to evolve, the earth and humanity must go through a transformation. Okay, we're always going through transformations. We're always evolving. We're never really the same. Okay, this is first done by a spiritual master. It's done by an individual first. He acts on behalf of humanity and makes humanity's transformation accessible. Okay, and then on the 4th page, you see this beautiful image of Christ hovering above Christ, the solar essence. He's the spirit of the sun. He's hovering here above his crucifix, and maybe you see Mary and John there. I'm not sure who's at the foot there. Page 5. Jesus Christ did this transformation for humanity. His transformed blood entered the spirit of the earth, making its power available for us to transform ourselves with. And then if you look at that image, you can see the blood flowing from the cross down, down, down deep into the earth. And this represents Christ's transformation, and that transformation centering and changing the quality of his blood. It's the etherization of his blood, and the Christ essence being codified in his blood and then going into the earth as a ritual event, and actually changing and creating an alchemical change so intensely that the earth's etheric body changes. There's now a new energy and a new essence in the etheric body of the earth as soon as Christ's blood hits the earth and flows into the earth. Now that energy is now available to humanity through the etheric field or the spirit of the earth. Okay, so as Christ was on the cross, and for the years in his life where he held the spirit of the sun in him, he was doing certain transformations within his being. He was etherizing himself. He was doing the transformation that we will all be doing in the coming thousands of years. He was doing that within himself first. He was etherizing himself first. He was spiritualizing himself first by his own power, by his own volition, using the spirit of the Son. And then his blood changed, his blood transformed. He transformed his blood. And his blood was then full of and changed and alchemized and full of that Christ essence that he'd taken on, full of that solar essence. Okay, now in prior ages of humanity, let's look at the Atlantean epoch, let's look at the Lemurian epoch. We didn't have the ability to have this solar essence within us, this solar Christed essence within us. We didn't have this. This blood didn't exist yet for humanity. This power didn't exist yet for humanity. This ritual had not yet occurred, and so it was not yet available. Instead, in prior epochs of humanity, looking at the Atlantean epoch, looking at the Lemurian epoch, how humanity evolved was actually by external forces. So you'd have to have a high priest that would do certain rituals with you, would work upon your bioenergetic field in a certain way, introduce you to certain energetic currents on the earth. You'd have to be exposed to certain cosmic forces, certain cosmic rays. There would be an energy transference between the priest or the priestess and the individual, but it was really all very external. Okay. Now we're talking about something completely different. We are talking about a different process entirely that is now available to us. In the Bible, you'll sometimes hear the words, the kingdom of God is within. The kingdom of God was not always within. It was not always that way for us. We were more like children in the past, and everything had to be done for us. We had to be imbued with information. We had to be guided to take on certain forces. That's why this is such a big deal, and that's why esoteric Christianity is so powerful, is that in esoteric Christianity and in Anthroposophy, namely specifically, we actually get to understand the new evolutionary impulse of our time. Whereas if we were to go with prior impulses like Lemuria or Atlantis, or even some of the even earlier impulses in civilization, we wouldn't be able to understand ourselves and our evolution, because really we've only had this impulse available to us for roughly just over 2,000 years. So it's important that we understand this. And so that's actually a very beautiful image of how the Christ essence came into the earth through the blood, the Christed blood of Jesus, and then changed the actual spirit of the earth. Once the spirit of the earth changed, it became available for us because we tap into the spirit of the earth. Okay. Page 6. We can now etherize our own blood with the essence of Christ. This process leads to the eventual re-spiritualization of our form. So now we're hearing that word, etherize, etherization, okay? Now we're first hearing the word etherize, which means that is the exact process that allows that Christ essence to commingle with us in our heart. So when we etherize our blood in our system, when it moves through our heart center, that is when we access the Christ essence. That is when we also tap into the spirit of the earth, where the Christ essence is waiting for us. And then we take on that Christ essence through our heart center, okay? And that changes our whole form. And it leads to the eventual re-spiritualization of our form. So let's go even deeper into etherization and the union of Christ in our heart, and the union of our etheric center with the spirit of the earth. Let's get into that. Okay, so we transform ourselves using these Christ forces, but we have to actually attune ourselves. We have to actually attune ourselves to Christ consciousness. We have to attune our heart to Christ consciousness, our mind. We have to actually be aware of it and attune ourselves to it in order to resonate and receive it. Okay. So this gets into the secret power of the human heart. This is a really talked about topic. A lot of people say, follow your heart, or, trust your heart's guidance, or the heart is the seat of the soul. It's the seat of consciousness. And a lot of traditions prior actually place the heart in this way as sort of more spiritually connected than the brain. And they actually didn't think the head or the brain was the seat of the soul at all. So there's always been this understanding that the heart is sort of this really special place within our being that is connected to spirit, that it's connected to the soul. And we can even take that further and see the heart as a transformational organ. We can see our heart having the ability to actually transform our bioenergetic field, to actually change the quality of our energy body. Okay, so this changing of the quality of our energy body begins with the etherization process of our blood, which is in the heart. So how this works exactly is this. Okay, so blood naturally passes through the heart. And as the blood passes through the heart, there's a portion of its mineral substance that is etherized, or it's slightly spiritualized. So we have blood passing through the heart, and that mineral element of our blood, a little bit of it all the time is being etherized, spiritualized, okay? And so our heart is sort of like this furnace, like this alchemical furnace that's always turning sort of information and energy that's coming from our lower chakra system, or from other directions in the body too. It's bringing it into the heart, and it's all centering there and welling up there, and then it's almost being like it's cooked in a kind of alchemical furnace and etherized into a more etheric substance. And then this then flows up to our head. It streams up into our head, up into our skull. And so what's flowing up into our skull after it goes to the heart is sort of this really refined spiritual matter that's transformed. And then once it gets into our skull, it goes into our brain, okay? And it goes into basically a space between the pineal and the pituitary glands. And this is really important because it is those glands and the space in between the pineal and the pituitary that actually contain astral forces, okay? So the heart is really connecting in with the spirit of the earth and the etheric plane. And then our head here is really connecting into the astral world. And the astral world is a higher dimension, really, a higher frequency. Then it's a cosmic frequency. And then the etheric is sort of like a in between physical and in between cosmic energies. And so there's this commingling, or what Rudolf Steiner actually calls a sewing together of astral and etheric forces in the brain, right in that place in between the pineal gland and the pituitary. And I have some images for you to look at so you can just get a good visualization of what I'm talking about. The first images are on page 7. It says, these images reveal the etherization of the blood in the human heart. The heart acts like an alchemical furnace. The new substance streams upwards. Okay, so these are actually Rudolf Steiner's drawings. That's why they're in German. Herz, Herz, means heart in German. And so these are 2 of his drawings, and they show the heart, right? And then they show this sort of streaming of energy that's going up from the heart into the head. This stream of up from the heart into the head. This new etherized substance. Okay. Same thing on the next image on page 8 there. This is just another little image of, just to help you guys picture the streaming of energy up from the heart to the head. And then on page 9, you can see the pituitary and the pineal gland. And then you can see that little kind of yellow line that is sort of this commingling of energy and kind of the sewing together there. All right. So in that space between the pineal gland and the pituitary, specifically, you have an astral and etheric substance sort of commingling and moving together. Okay. And we know from a lot of basic occult physiology or esoteric physiology, or understanding the human body as a energetic thing, we've known for thousands of years that the pineal and pituitary work together. Specifically, what will happen is through meditation, what will happen, and this is in the Eastern traditions before Christ's incarnation, this sort of pathway was already being prepared, and it was already we were already sort of working on it and preparing it for this point in our evolution. And so if you look up a lot of the old Hindu texts and even different Buddhist texts, and they have all those really incredible drawings of the energy centers, they talk about a very specific channel as well that goes right from the heart, and it bypasses the throat chakra actually, and it goes right into the middle of the brain to the pineal gland and the pituitary. And specifically what happens is when we would meditate on the heart, it would send a current up to the pituitary, and the pituitary would begin to fill up with energy, because wherever focus goes, energy flows. So we're starting to build up this channel for this time. And what would happen is eventually the pituitary gland would fill up with radiance, with energy, right? Like, we don't physically realize how energy is circulating in our body and how we can actually radiate light, right? And so what would happen is the pituitary gland would then be basically charged fully with this energy, and it would begin to stimulate the pineal gland across from it. And then the pineal gland would activate, and then you would begin to get clairvoyance, and there'd be a certain level of development that you could achieve. So this pathway between our heart and our pituitary and pineal gland was kind of placed in our system long ago in preparation for this exact time of evolution, where we would be able to one day have that Christ essence available in the etheric of the earth. We could then charge ourselves with it by pulling it into our heart center, the furnace of the heart. And then that could then go into our skull, into our brain, between our pineal and pituitary, and cause all kinds of different, at that point, it can cause inspiration, it can cause genius, it can cause regeneration. And it also sort of spiritualizes the mind, and it spiritualizes your whole system, so that when you do go into that head space, which is the astral space, your essence is pure. You've purified it in the heart with Christ. So then when you do begin to interact cosmically, so when you do begin to get ideas, when you do begin to receive impressions, things like this we normally do, they're actually very advanced and they're actually very evolved. And we actually have the capacity for spirituality, because once we get into the head where all the astral influences are, that's kind of like where we get our creativity and stuff. So if we're able to circulate upwards a very pure, refined, spiritual, Christed energy from the heart through the etherization of our blood with Christ present in it, with a union in our heart with Christ, we have a very refined, etherized blood that's way more refined than it was yesterday. That is coming up into the head, and that is allowing us to pull in more refined information. It allows us to think more clearly. It allows us to have ingenuity, inspiration, new ideas. So that's where all that occurs. And then this sort of completely spiritualized essence that's happened then goes and recirculates back into our system, and that's where we can get that regeneration of our form, because we've gone in and we've pulled in that Christed energy from the spirit of the earth. We've pulled it in through the furnace of the heart, and we've circulated it. So that is regeneration. That is what regenerates us. That is what brings us our genius, right? That is renewal. That is resurrection. That is redemption. That is salvation. That is all of these things that are the cornerstone in esoteric Christianity, and really in every single esoteric tradition, really, but really comes forward in the more modern forms of spiritual science. Okay, so divine information. Yes, this is how we get the divine information. And it's also how, to be quite honest, it's also how we stay aligned. It's how we stay aligned with the evolution of the cosmos, right? Because part of the dynamic that's also going on, the reason why Christ incarnated and took on the sun and gave it to the earth and made it available for us, was because the earth needed that. We needed that, because we have to evolve. We have to grow, right? We need that impetus. We have to. Nothing stays the same, so we need this. So when we do it within ourselves, what that means is that we're actually evolving with the cosmos. We're evolving with our earth. We're evolving together. We're evolving with our sun. Okay? So to do this is to evolve. To do this over time, if we continue to do this, we will also spiritualize our form or ascend, because that is the path of evolution at this time. The next planetary incarnation is associated with Jupiter. And in the anthroposophical system, it is called New Jupiter. And that is the consciousness that Earth will move into in several thousand years, right? So we're preparing our form to move into New Jupiter, which is associated with etheric, the etheric body. So we're creating and catalyzing our etheric body every day, preparing for that higher form, that higher earth that we are moving into. We are creating that form, okay? So over time, this process leads to a new body entirely, a new condition of life entirely, a new form entirely, okay? So we are always transforming our blood into this delicate, ethereal substance. And Rudolf Steiner called this really beautifully the laving or the washing or the bathing of the pineal gland with the etherized blood of the heart. So I want to read to you what he said. And this is actually on page 10. In the region of the heart, there is a continual transformation of the blood into this delicate etheric substance, which streams upwards towards the head and glimmers around the pineal gland. Fine etheric currents coming from the heart stream continuously through the brain and continuously lave or wash over the pineal gland, which becomes luminous in its movements as a physical brain organ respond in harmony with these etheric currents emanating from the heart. So isn't that just the most beautiful imagery of this solar furnace in our heart that's catalyzing our own etheric form with Christ in the etheric, in the spirit of the earth, and just washing our body with it, washing our body with this beautiful, etherized, Christed light all the time, all the time. And so, because we were talking earlier about how Jesus in his life at the age of 30 took on the spirit of the earth, the spirit of the sun, it's really interesting to also know that the heart is a solar organ. So there's an immediate resonance going on here. We can get a sense of the ritual that he was doing for humanity. The heart is a solar organ, and it's the solar force that etherizes man and regenerates man with the heart. Okay. And so this was actually known by people who were deep into the mysteries. And sometimes you'll see these very beautiful classical, oftentimes I think Renaissance images of halos. And the halo is actually representing the etherized blood that travels upward, that streams upward into the skull, into the head, and commingles with the pineal gland and forms that beautiful Christed astral etheric energy in the head. And what happens is if this can be done with great magnitude, and the person's bioenergetic field and body can become very pure, they become very noble, they become exalted, what will happen is that you can see actually a little halo around the head, almost like a little solar corona. And the painters, Renaissance painters, used to portray them to show that this individual was, in a way, Christed. They were exalted. And you have some images there on page 11. Okay. And there's also something called the astral cap. And I found this really interesting that sometimes it's part of the structure that these beautiful astral etheric forces will sort of almost like dam up in the head for a while. And it forms a little ring within our head, actually, where there is this solar Christed etheric blood essence, and it's mixing with the hyper spiritual cosmic astral essence, and it's forming like a ring, or what's called an astral cap in our brain, in our head. It's not real blood, it's not like physical dense blood, it's the etherized blood and the spiritualized etherized blood in the head. It's kind of like a etheric astral solar Christed stream, and it actually can form a little bit of a cap like this around the head. And why this happens is actually so that we can receive God. It's actually so that we can generate enough sort of magnetic power within ourselves that we can pull in insight and information. So it wells up there in order to really be able to pull that in, and then it's recirculated. And so that's what the halo represents when we look at it through the eyes of spiritual science and esoteric Christianity. So there's a Leo, on page 11, there's a Leonardo da Vinci image of the Annunciation, and she's got a beautiful solar corona. And obviously, Jesus is always portrayed with his halo, his solar. Of course, he is. He took on the sun for 3 years. And I always find that there's huge initiatory secrets in a lot of the older Christian paintings, which we will go very deeply into in this lecture. And so you can see already that in this image on page 11 here, that the heart, it's Christ's sacred heart, right? And what is that saying? That's saying, my essence is etherized in the heart center, and it flows upwards to the skull, to the brain, and it unites with the cosmos and spins back down again. So in a lot of this artwork, you're seeing such beautiful spiritual, scientific hints at what is really going on within us. The gentleman in the kind of the brownie red, nobody knows where that painting came from, but does he ever have an elaborate crown chakra and aura and halo? That's a very interesting one. And then the last image with Bernardo Dotti, who always had the most phenomenally, like almost jeweled looking halos. Well, this is all about the etherized blood from the heart that's etherized specifically with Christ in it, that flows to the head. It brings your divinity to you. It allows you to transform. And it's no joke, because these are some beautiful, beautiful halos. All right. So, the other one too that's really interesting is as soon as you start getting into looking at how the masters are portrayed. So this would be in modern language. This would be they'd probably be called the Brotherhood of the White Light, or they'd be called the Great White Brotherhood, Ascended Masters. I think in Anthroposophy, there's an overlap to a degree with calling them Bodhisattvas. They would have been associated with the great rishis of India. There's always been these exalted human beings. It's part of, our solar system is one giant school. Right. So you're going to have these individuals that have reached very exalted status. And once you reach that super exalted status as a master, usually how you get further is through sacrifice, some form of sacrifice, which we can get into in later lectures. But I'm mentioning masters, spiritual masters, these very high initiates, because their energy will often also glow golden. They'll have a golden essence around them, or a golden glow. And that is because their energy body is Christed. It is flowing with that etherized blood that's been etherized with Christ, and it's flowing through their entire system. And it is in such a high quantity, in such a high degree, that it actually makes them radiate with it. Okay, so that's why they're portrayed that way. So let's round this out. Blood enters the heart, and the heart etherizes the blood, or turns the subtle mineral substances into a higher etheric form. This etherized blood essence then goes into the brain, into the pineal gland, where it is transformed again into a higher astral substance. These substances commingle, and the newly transformed substance then circulates back into the body. Over time, this is how we actually evolve. We actually end up raising our energy to such an incredible degree through the Christ impulse within us that our etheric body actually begins to loosen from the physical. Okay? So, now, this is where we have to start having a little bit of a different conversation. We were kind of flying high earlier, and we're talking about Jesus, and we're talking about how a great master can take on the spirit of the sun and all this incredible, powerful, beautiful material. But now we kind of have to talk about something else, which is if we can etherize our form with Christ and we can evolve through that process, then is there also the capacity to devolve? You know, what if somebody can't understand Christ consciousness or Christ? And what if they can't bring that essence into their heart? What happens then? Because it is a choice. Remember, we're individuals. We have our I developed, which means we are creating ourselves via our own volition. So what happens when somebody denies this process or does not understand this process or know that it exists? Okay, so we have to get into this. So there's different levels of etherization. So the basic process of etherization, so just the blood switching into a more etherized form, does not guarantee that it is connected to Christ. It does not guarantee that it is going to spiritualize your form. So when we were talking earlier about this process, the real focus was that when the blood is etherized in the heart, you want to connect it with the spirit of the earth and Christ consciousness in the etheric. You want to connect that basic process of etherization that's already occurring in your system. You want to unite that or bring that in union with Christ. Okay, but the reality is that there is an etherization process that happens in the heart, whether you're connected to Christ or not. Remember how I said that pathway was being prepared in earlier incarnations of humanity, that pathway from the heart to the pineal gland? Well, that can be activated and done without using the Christ essence at all. You can have your more grosser forms, your more mineral essences in your blood etherize, and it doesn't pass through Christ at all. It doesn't connect with the Christ essence in the spirit of the earth at all. And this is more using the pathway, the older pathway. It's sort of like trying to run your body in a way that would have been okay before Christ existed, before that ritual was done. So it's kind of like trying to run your body in a way that would have been good like thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, right? So you still can choose to do that. You don't have to have a union with Christ in your heart. So that means that you're not going through that kind of that catalyst of the Christ essence. It's just kind of passing through and going through the mechanical dematerialization, and it's just kind of going through in a more mechanical way, but there's no actual transformational substance in it. Okay. So this is kind of, it's also kind of a big deal because when we are catalyzing our blood with Christ or making that union, once that Christ etherized blood essence goes into their head, we are actually pulling in higher and higher astral forces, or more attuned, more balanced astral forces every time we go up there. And we're bringing that into our system. So we're really always spiritualizing ourselves in a more pure way or a more balanced way by Christ in our heart, right? So if you can't bring that essence into your heart, you're not really able to spiritualize yourself. Okay? So this is a little bit of an excerpt from anthroposophy.eu, and it just goes into a little bit more on how the blood merges with the Christ impulse in the earth. Man can align his own etheric stream between the heart and the brain with that of the Christ impulse, the astral etheric stream in the spirit of the earth called the Christ. This is how the Christ impulse underlies the spiritualization of mankind through this principle. Okay, so if somebody is not understanding Christ, they're not allowing that impulse to transform them. Okay, so let's actually hear what Steiner has to say about the mystery of Golgotha. Okay, and the mystery of Golgotha, by the way, is just another word for the mystery of the crucifixion, or the mystery of Christ's death and the transference of his energy into the earth, and the change that happened upon his death. Okay. And this is Steiner. Since the mystery of Golgotha, however, there has existed the continuous possibility for the activity of the etheric blood of Christ to flow together with the streamings from below upward, from heart to head. Okay? So since the mystery of Golgotha has existed the continuous possibility for the activity of the etheric blood of Christ to flow together with the streamings from below upward, from the heart to the head. Because the etherized blood of Jesus of Nazareth is present in the etheric body of the earth, it accompanies the etherized human blood streaming upward from the heart to the brain, so that not only do these streams that I described earlier meet in man, but the human bloodstream unites with the bloodstream of Christ, Jesus. So our blood is actually in union with his in the etheric. We're actually communing with him in that way. A union of these two streams can come about. However, only if man is able to unfold true understandings of what is contained in the Christ impulse. Otherwise, there can be no union. The two streams then mutually repel each other and thrust each other away. Okay, so what we have here is that if we do not find that union in our heart with Christ consciousness, with Christ in the etheric, what ends up happening is that the stream of the head and the heart can become broken. It actually breaks apart the streams of energy in our body. And we begin to fragment, and they will repel each other. So there are consequences for humanity when humanity reaches an evolutionary point where they have to evolve with the cosmos. And they decide not to, or they can't. It actually leads to the degeneration of their form, because eventually these streams begin to repel each other, the heart and the head, and probably other streams in the body as well. And the system can no longer be integrated, and it leads to the fragmentation of our consciousness, and it leads to other things that we'll get into a little bit later in this lecture. But it's very important to understand that if we do not understand what is contained within the Christ impulse, and what it is, then there can be no union, and the two streams will mutually repel each other and thrust each other away. So it's kind of like you could see it as like a battle going on within you. You know, you've got this desire on one hand to evolve and transform and to grow, maybe, and then you've got this other aspect that is working against you, or because there is no union in the heart, everything begins to kind of fall apart. All right. So the etherization of the blood is a natural process of our subtle bodies. We have the option to link our heart with Christ, which is now in the etheric body of the earth, and to use that force to transform ourselves. We do this through understanding Christ, which allows us to work directly with the Christ essence within ourselves. We also have the capacity to not do this. And if we do this, this will lead to the fragmentation of our being as various different streams begin to repel each other. Okay, so in a lot of ways, that solar essence and that Christ essence is like the great unifier within us and within humanity and within the cosmos. And of course, one of the most beautiful things about the Steiner work, about Anthroposophy, is that he actually goes into pretty intense detail about how the Christ stream or the Christ impulse has evolved on the earth over time. So there's been other individuals who have taken on the Christ essence in the past. You know, there's been Krishna, there's been the Buddha, there's been varying individuals, lots of individuals who have sort of worn similar, that have sort of had a lot of this Christ force in them and have been expressions of it. And then that led basically to this one point where we experience this transformation through the Master Jesus. It gets all brought inside of us for the first time. And then that allows us to work upon ourselves and evolve into a higher and higher form. So in Anthroposophy, the Christ essence is also seen as a kind of lineage, a kind of stream. And there's the reincarnation of Christ and the various different beings that have kind of played similar roles. And that is all placed very nicely in Anthroposophy, and it's also in the Casey work as well. So let's move on to page 12 in your booklet, in your PDF. And we're going to get to the mystery of Golgotha, the mystery of the crucifixion, the mystery of the blood, and the mystery of the spirit and the earth. We're gonna get into some visual representations of this very powerful point in the Christian mysteries, which is everything that we're talking about here today, which is the etherization of the blood with Christ in the heart flowing into the skull. Okay, so let's get into this as it has been left for us by different Christian mystics in the past, and how this very powerful and important process that we're talking about today was really left for us, you know, in lots of different painting and religious imagery. So if you want to go to page 12 in your PDF, you're going to see sort of an interesting looking picture that looks like, it looks like a head, it looks like a face looking at you, or a skull. And this is the location called Golgotha. Now, Golgotha means the place of the skull. Golgotha means skull. And you can also tell that it's also sometimes called the garden tomb. Okay? And this is actually where Christ was crucified. It is where the solar rite of the Master took place. It is where his blood poured into the earth. and entered the spirit of the earth, transforming it and bringing the sun into the earth. Okay, so you can see by looking at these images that are quite bloody, you know, many images of the crucifixion show the etherization process where Christ's transformed blood flows into the skull. So that is exactly what these images represent. You can see the blood flowing from Christ down into the skull. This is the process of etherization. That is what is being represented in these images. And that's why you'll see with this one by Crivelli, if you zoom in, you can also see there we have the etherized blood flowing into the skull. Just like how our etherized blood flows into our skull. But now after his death, after the crucifixion, after he did that rite, that Christed etherized blood is flowing into the skull. Okay, and so there's some beautiful halos in this imagery as well. Lots of imagery here. And the next one by Mantanga also shows that stream of blood flowing into the skull. Now, how many of you have paid attention to these crucifixion images and actually noticed that there was a skull there? See, there's always little hints that different adepts and people who understood this left for us in art and in our life. Now, there's lots of symbology with the skull as well, but this is one of my favorites. Some of it's pretty bloody, but you know, blood is a very powerful spiritual force, and so having it depicted in this way is definitely giving us a very strong message. And then on the last page here, on page 17, I have included all the different images of, there were so many crucifixion images where this secret was present in the imagery. I just couldn't even choose the ones to use. There's so many of them, but I've also inserted the image of Rudolf Steiner's head to the heart, just to really show you how important this process is to us. The last image in your booklet is actually showing you, again, it's showing you that blood of Christ with the sun inside of him. He's got the spirit of the sun in his body. His blood is transformed and it is going into the earth. And that last image is beautiful, and it has fallen into the earth and it is growing roses around the cross. And that has a lot of secret imagery in it as well. So that is one of the mysteries of Golgotha, is that power, that furnace of our heart flowing Christ's blood into our head. Okay? So again, let's go back into what happens if we do not connect with Christ, if we do not understand. What about those that do not take on the task of this evolutionary experience for us? Well, where there is the potential of evolution, there's always the potential of devolution. So the etherization process will still happen in our system, as I mentioned earlier, but what will happen is it will basically just start to catalyze or solidify everything that we've already got going on. So because there's no Christ impulse in our heart, it just basically keeps recycling and solidifying and confirming everything that's going on in our system. So basically just nothing gets transformed. Okay. And ultimately, our environment, our cosmos, the sun, everything is evolving. And so we can choose, it's not really a choice, but we can become so unaware of ourself and so unaware of our environment that we can actually cut ourselves off from this process. So what tends to happen is that the heart has always really been this alchemical organ, and it's there to transform our lower chakra issues, our lower chakra stuff, into a more healed essence, and then circulate it through our system. And our lower chakra system is kind of like where all of our pain is. It's where all of our trauma is. It is where our negative ego is. It's where our survival our survival instincts and mechanisms are. That's all lower chakra stuff. And everything that's unhealed, everything that's dark, kind of settles in the densest chakras, the lower chakras. And then they'll naturally just try to stream upwards. And then if they don't meet that transformational essence in the heart, what ends up happening is it just goes through a mechanical process of etherization, and it just goes up into the brain and starts mixing with the lowest possible astral substances, and it goes back and cycles again. And so what you basically have without the Christ essence in the heart is a complete recycling of your pain, of your trauma, and this causes your mind and your entire system to eventually be basically dominated by the lower centers. And sometimes you'll see this with different individuals who just seem to be so focused in the lower chakras. And it just seems like they can't get out of it. They can't perceive anything beyond it. Well, this is because that energy has just been cycling and confirmed and reconfirmed through their system for so long that it's the energy body that they're building for themselves, the etheric form that they're building for themselves is not a healthy one. They're just sort of catalyzing themselves into something, into a kind of degeneracy, really. So let's really nail this home and look at some of the symptoms of non-Christed etherization. So if you're just recycling all of the energy within your lower chakras, you're probably going to develop materialist ideologies as well, because it's sort of like, the intellect of your head and the mind is just unifying with the lower three chakras. And so what ends up happening, because the heart isn't doing anything, it's not catalyzing anything, it's not creating change. So what ends up happening is just that your intellect starts to only serve your lower three chakras. So basically, you start using your intellect to serve your negative ego. You start using your intellect to focus on only your survival, and all the things that you think about are just basically based in selfishness. And there's also no real development of your I. It's just basically using your intellect to serve yourself. There's no real connection to other people. There's no compassion. There's no empathy, because again, only when the heart is activating and growing do we get access to connecting with other people in a compassionate way. It's always been known that when the heart chakra activates, the specific cities or the specific spiritual powers that you get from an activated heart chakra is empathy and is compassion and is the ability to feel what other people are feeling, the ability to feel other people's even physical ailments, the ability to feel beyond yourself. That is all a heart chakra thing. And the heart chakra needs to be activated for that. And so if you're not activating the heart chakra, which again is through Christ, then you're basically just using all of your intellect, all of your smarts to serve your negative ego for power, for control. And the more that you do that, the harder it actually becomes to get out of it. Because we do have a very powerful intellect. And that's the negative side of having an I, of having our individuality and independence, is we got manas, M-A-N-A-S. Manas in the Eastern tradition is called manas, but it's also called mind. And we're supposed to use our heart center to catalyze our mind into something called buddhi, buddhi spirit, and higher consciousness, which means we're supposed to unite our mind with God, with our higher self. And the first way we do that is by developing our heart center with Christ, which allows us to feel beyond ourselves and know beyond ourselves. And then that prepares us to rise into buddhi spirit, and the purification of our astral form. And so there's this whole evolutionary process that begins with this heart catalyzation. And if we don't get it, we just basically end up using the gift of our I, the gift of our individuality, and the gift of mind that came with that. We basically just begin to use it for ourselves, and the world becomes very selfish, and very much based on survival. And this is where we get the next part of our initiation story in this time, which is the war of all against all, which I will be lecturing on soon as well, is this use of the I without the heart, and how it just creates this very selfish, self-centered way of life. So that's the symptoms of the individual that are not Christed in their heart center. And also, when you do this, if you're not influenced by Christ, then you're going to be influenced by two other beings that represent extremes, and they're called Ahriman and Lucifer. And the last lecture I did was actually on Ahriman and Lucifer, and those are actually the beings that you end up cycling your energy through if you're not connecting in your heart with Christ. Okay, so we're always connecting with something spiritually, right? And ultimately, and this is something that I've personally seen with this, when I take the reality that we are supposed to be spiritualizing our form, eventually, if individuals cannot grasp this and they cannot be able to do this work, their form will begin to degenerate and their form will begin to mutate, because you can't have different streams within your system fighting one another. That's going to degenerate your form. And this is where we get a lot of the weird looking beings in the eighth sphere and things like this, things that can never develop the heart center, things that have turned their back on God. Everything, of course, is of God, of course. But when we get to our evolutionary level where we have individuality, we can actually create things that represent the complete opposite of God, that are dark, that are imbalanced, and that are destructive. So we have the ability to turn these forces against ourselves that eventually lead to our own destruction. And that's why this is a great initiation, is because, if we can get through it and use these forces properly, if we can understand what the Christ impulse is, what it really, really, really is, and not get it confused with like dogmatic stuff, but really understand the esoteric reality of it, we can really evolve consciously. So because we just talked about sort of what happens when the essence is not etherized in the heart with Christ, let's get into how our mind and how our being works when we do etherize it with Christ. And so when that happens, we actually start to become very interested in higher worlds. We begin to actually become interested in them. We begin to want to sense them. We can begin to sense things greater than ourselves. As I mentioned earlier, you begin to develop a natural compassion for the world, a natural compassion for other people. You begin to see yourself as interconnected with everything and everyone and with the earth. There's a beautiful natural interconnectivity that comes with it. And there's also a selflessness. This is where we get into the creation of a higher society as well. Real higher societies are built through individuals being spiritually aware and understanding compassion and selflessness. And so that begins by Christ in the heart. They also become ruled not by survivalism and survival instincts, but by a desire to heal, evolve, and love. So over time, through doing this work, you become motivated by something completely different and just connecting into something completely different, higher forces. And you realize and you begin to understand that in this life, the best things come from being in service to humanity and focusing on healing yourself, and maybe even reaching out and trying to heal others, that's really where the joy comes from. You also begin to develop the self, the I. You begin to develop your I, and you begin to round out the entire evolutionary arc of humanity by going through that materialization phase that can lead to, in its darkness, a kind of selfishness. You get to rise out of that, and you get to develop and retain your I. So the big threat, if you cannot really accept this Christ essence in your heart, is kind of the loss of the I. Because to really develop individuality, we have to go through a period where we actually understand that we are all interconnected, ironically. That's actually how, on a greater scale, we actually understand our individuality. We don't actually understand our individuality by being selfish and by being in survival mode all the time and trying to hoard everything for yourself. And that's actually not where you learn anything about yourself. That is a completely distorted way of being that shows that an individual is functioning from extreme pain. Okay. So, the blood is etherized in the heart of all individuals, but it can be etherized or transformed in the image of love or fear. The heart has potential to imbue our blood with the essence of Christ in the etheric plane, which in turn evolves our entire form. If one cannot attune their heart to Christ, then the etherized process will work against them and solidify their devolution.